An unprecedented speech from the Secretary of State, a fiery response from Israel's prime minister, and a new low point in relations between two staunch, longtime allies. But what comes next for the U.S. and Israel, with only weeks until President-elect Trump takes office? Good morning, everyone. I'm Heather Childers, live in America's Newsroom.
Wow, a lot of news for a Christmas week. I'm Leland Vittert. Bill and Martha have today off. Reaction really pouring in from around the world to Secretary of State John Kerry's speech yesterday that contended Israel for continued settlement activity in Palestinian areas and defended the U.S.'s decision to allow that anti-Israel vote at the United Nations. Israeli lawmakers calling it a parting shot from an unfriendly Obama administration, but some in Washington speculating it was also a message for President-elect Donald Trump. Garrett Tenney, live in Washington, where all of this intersects. Good morning, Garrett.
Leland, good morning to you. And Israeli leaders are also describing this speech as worthless and a pathetic step towards any kind of peace agreement. In his hour-long speech, Kerry criticized Israel's settlements and defended the U.S.'s decision not to protect Israel at the UN Security Council last week over that very issue. Kerry then went on to say Israel has repeatedly shut down peace talks with its actions, a point that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vigorously denied in his response yesterday afternoon.
How can you make peace with someone who rejects your very existence? This conflict is and has always been about Israel's very right to exist.
And Netanyahu did not hide his exasperations with the Obama White House and said Israel is very much looking forward to working with the next administration. Leland?
Unprecedented in so many ways, Garrett, and unusual, too, because you really have two U.S. leaders here. You have President Obama, President-elect Trump, who's going to take office in less than 30 days. How's he reacting to Secretary Kerry's speech?
You'll remember, even before Secretary Kerry gave his speech, Mr. Trump was already criticizing it on Twitter. And then last night, he went on to say he thinks Israel has been treated very unfairly by a lot of people.
We have different views. We have to have peace. I think it's set it back. But we're going to see what happens after January 20th, right? I think you're going to be very impressed.
And exactly what Mr. Trump plans to do once he takes office in terms of U.S.-Israel relations is unclear, though Israel leaders are very much looking forward to that. Leland?
Well, we know Mr. Trump's already talked about moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That would certainly be a start the Israelis would appreciate. Garrett Tenney starting us off in Washington. Thanks, Garrett. Heather has more.
Yeah, so for more on this, let's go to Daniel Halper. He's Washington Bureau Chief for the New York Post. Thank you very much for joining us. A very busy day. A lot of reaction continues today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so a lot of folks, the big problem amongst a lot of problems in this speech was the amount of time that was spent on settlements itself. And our research area here called the Brain Room actually took a look at that, and they compared the numbers. Iran, they said, was mentioned 1 time in John Kerry's speech. Then you've got Hezbollah 1 time, Hamas 4 times, terrorism 7 times, and then you have settlements 42 times. Is that a problem for you?
Yeah, I think so. Look, the whole anti-settlement craze, it presupposes that Jews basically wouldn't be allowed to live in Palestinian areas once there was a final resolution between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That essentially is an endorsement of some sort of ethnic apartheid or ethnic cleansing to move the Jews out of those final areas, of those settlements in the Palestinian state. And I don't think that that's a policy that the United States should support, because it's just not, it goes against American values in many ways. And look, you know, there's a lot of disagreements and a lot of reason to say, there's cogent arguments against settlements, but the whole premise behind them tends to be that Jews can't live in areas run by Palestinians, and I think that's not a policy that America should be behind.
Yeah, I was listening to Charles Krauthammer speak about this last night. I believe that you were on with him, and he talked specifically about that and asked the question why the U.S. did not just insist that the language, that one line there that said including East Jerusalem, be taken out. Why do you think that was not the case?
Well, we don't know. We're getting more information. Israelis insist that the Americans were the driving force behind this. I'm not so sure that that even matters. The fact that America allowed this to happen, I think, it means that they should have to answer for it, and, you know, that Barack Obama and John Kerry should have to answer for it. We don't know the reasoning, but it does seem like a very self-indulgent exercise. This whole thing appears to be. Look, Barack Obama came into office pledging to have Middle East peace and to bring about Middle East peace. He came in thinking that settlements were the problem. He's leaving thinking that settlements are the problem.
Yeah.
He's not really holding the Palestinians to the fire here. And of course, this speech is nonsense, right? It's not going to bring about peace. Nobody believes that this is any step in any sort of peace process. Instead, it's just a way for them to air their grievances and describe what they think is right, even though it has zero bearing on reality and on any sort of future peace.
What about emboldening extremists? There's been some concern expressed about that. In his speech, Kerry referred to Hamas as a militant group. Both Hamas and Hezbollah, they were both declared foreign terrorist organizations by the United States back in 1997. So what impact will his words have on, those type of organizations?
Well, that's a very real possibility. Of course, Hamas is a terrorist organization, and calling them anything short of that is a way of legitimizing them, and that's a problem that America is far enough away that we don't have to worry about that. But the Israelis, they do have to worry about it since they're right there. And, it just stands to embolden them and say, look, we have some sort of negotiating power, even though nobody views them as a legitimate power because of their status of the terrorist organization. So I think there are real consequences from the Kerry speech. There aren't really real consequences on the peace process. But, of course, the UN action does pose different consequences, and that is a change in international law, and that will be something in a way that is sort of more powerful than just John Kerry droning on for 73 minutes at the State Department.
73 minutes long. And, it does have implications because that area that we were just talking about, East Jerusalem, it's been central to, Jewish identity for 2,000 years. But it does appear that Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, the president-elect, appear to be moving forward. Listen to what the president of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, had to say.
Israelis do not need to be lectured about the importance of peace by foreign leaders. Israel's hand has been extended in peace to its neighbors from day one.
Obviously, I meant Prime Minister there. And then our president, Donald Trump, here's what he tweeted. He said, we cannot continue to let Israel be treated with such total disdain and disrespect. They used to have a great friend in the U.S., but not anymore. The beginning of the end was the horrible Iran deal. And now this, stay strong, Israel. January 20th is fast approaching, of course, that being when he takes office. So what implications does this have for the Trump administration?
Well, if we're experiencing a low between U.S. and Israeli relations, I think in 3-4 weeks' time we're going to be experiencing a high. The question, I think, for the Israelis is why are they betting everything on Donald Trump and not emphasizing this bipartisan, or what used to be considered a bipartisan approach to Israel? Elliot Engel was on this network earlier this morning, Democrat from New York. He expressed frustration in the Obama administration's actions. Chuck Schumer has. I'm not sure why the Israelis aren't embracing more bipartisan voices and instead appearing more partisan. I think in the long run that may not be a wise choice, but clearly in the short run there will be obviously very close relations between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump because they both say so. So we just know that that's going to be happening very soon.
That appears to be the case, and they're making that clear. We're going to talk a little bit more about the other response from other legislators and leaders here in America coming up. Daniel, in the meantime, thank you so much for your take on what happened, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, Heather.
A Fox News alert with another devastating loss for movie fans as we learned that legendary actress Debbie Reynolds has died at the age of 84. The Hollywood icon leaving behind a legacy of singing and, of course, dancing that we will never forget on the silver screen. Welcome back. This Thursday morning, 2 U.S. service members died when their Apache helicopter crashed into the water near Pasadena, Texas. The chopper went down during what they described as a routine training exercise. You can see the Coast Guard divers going down to inspect the wreckage right there. That's the wheels of the helicopter. Military officials say both soldiers were highly trained veterans. Not clear yet what caused the crash that is now being investigated.
Well, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle slamming Secretary of State John Kerry after his speech yesterday condemning Israeli settlement building. Now, Speaker Paul Ryan tweeting, quote, after allowing this anti-Israel resolution to pass the UN, Secretary Kerry has no credibility to speak on Israeli-Palestinian peace. Senator Chuck Schumer saying, quote, it is extremely frustrating, disappointing, and confounding that the administration has failed to veto this resolution. Whatever one's views are on settlements, the UN is the wrong forum to settle these issues. The UN has been a fervently anti-Israel body since the days of Zionism is racism, and unfortunately that fervor has never diminished. And that brings in Doug Schoen. He's a former advisor to President Bill Clinton and a Fox News contributor. And David Avella, he is the chairman of GOPAC and a Republican strategist. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you. Good morning.
Doug, I'll start with you. Your reaction.
Well, look, I'm a Democrat, but I side with Senator Schumer, Eliot Engel, Ben Cardin. This made no sense. This was a gratuitous slap at Israel to say that the settlements have been an impediment to the peace process is just plain wrong. The Arabs refused to accept Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. They refused to negotiate with Israel. And this was just an attack, a gratuitous one, on Israel that I think really reflects the petulance and the frustration of Secretary Kerry and President Obama at the end of their term.
And Doug, you're not the only one using those words. David, we had Speaker Ryan, his quote at the very beginning. He said that Secretary Kerry has no credibility to speak on this at all.
Finally, President Obama has found a way to unite Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill. But, Heather, the bigger point here is this is why Democrats can't win a third term to the White House. The last time a Democrat left the White House, President Clinton, they tore off the W's off keyboards. They did $15,000 worth of damage to the White House. And Sandy Berger left the White House with national security documents stuffed in his sock. This administration, President Obama, is going to leave making us in worse shape with every ally we had when he came in office, the health care system a wreck, and the taxes higher on every American. I guess when you compare the two, President Clinton was kind of tame, but it's why voters don't give Democrats a third term.
And Doug, I'll just jump ahead to that question I was going to ask. Why right now, 3 weeks out to a change in the administration? Why do this now, and why make a 70-minute speech like that?
Well, I think, as I said, it reflects what I call petulance and frustration. I think the failure of the administration to get the peace process going, and I remind my friend David that there was a peace process that almost ended up in a deal at the end of the Clinton administration at the Y Plantation and at Camp David. The Arabs didn't accept getting 97% of the West Bank, so I really think that the time for partisanship is sometime other than today, when we have a new administration moving forward with a very different policy. And those of us who support Israel, I think, should support bipartisan efforts to produce and enhance a peace process in the Middle East rather than engaging in ad hominem attacks.
Doug, was this directly aimed at the president-elect Donald Trump as he takes office from President Obama?
I think it absolutely was. I think that the Obama administration was really taking aim on Donald Trump and David Friedman, his appointment to be ambassador to Israel, and trying to underscore that they have a different approach, indeed a failed approach, but one that they feel apparently very strongly about. I think the time now is to pull together behind Donald Trump, not try to emphasize our differences on foreign policy, but try to come together as a nation as we approach a new year and a new administration.
David, you mentioned Congressman Engel. He was on earlier. You said on Fox and Friends. We have a little bit of that, and I'll get you to respond to it.
We're here in New York, 6,000 miles away from Israel. It's easy for us to sit and point fingers and say the Israelis should do this, the Israelis should do that. By the way, I didn't hear very much from John Kerry about what the Palestinians need to do.
And then we had Senator John McCain, his response to this as well. He said that this would embolden Israel's enemies. So, David, across both sides of the aisle, as we have said, bringing Republicans and Democrats together against what has happened. So is this an effort to put the entire administration kind of behind the 8 ball moving forward?
Well, certainly there are many Republicans and Democrats who understand the significance of this, not only in Israel, but here in the United States. We have to have allies across the world, including in Israel, because they have seen the attacks that those who want to do harm right here in this country, those in Israel have already been experiencing them, and they've been experiencing them for decades. If we want to be able to get some insights, if we want to be able to get some ideas on how to combat the threats that are now happening here in the United States, it is far more important for us to have allies in the Middle East, starting with Israel, than it is to be making enemies as President Obama is leaving office.
All right, David, thank you so much for joining us. David, Doug, appreciate it.
Thank you,
The opinions
Heather.
will continue. And we'll be right back here on America's Newsroom, so stay with us.
One of the Trump campaign's big themes, of course, was bringing jobs back to America from overseas. Now President-elect Trump is taking credit for an announcement from Sprint for what he says will be thousands of jobs coming back now to the U.S.
I was just called by the head people at Sprint, and they're going to be bringing 5,000 jobs back to the United States. They're taking them from other countries. They're bringing them back to the United States. And also OneWeb, a new company, is going to be hiring 3,000 people. So that's very exciting.
Joining us now, Melissa Francis, co-host of After the Bell on the Fox Business Network. Melissa, nice to see you.
You too. Happy New Year.
And to you. A couple days away. We'll get to whether we're going to see Dow 20,000 in a minute before the new year. And so you have President-elect Trump coming out anytime a company announces that jobs are coming back to America and saying, see, I promised I was going to bring jobs back.
Yeah.
5,000 Sprint jobs. How many of these jobs are coming back because of President-elect Trump? How many are coming back because Sprint's decided it's good business and people don't like to talk about their cell phone bills with folks in the Philippines?
They're actually all because of Trump, I would challenge, because when this deal was originally struck, so SoftBank is a Japanese bank which took a controlling interest in Sprint, and when that deal came to fruition, the big concern and the big brouhaha was how many jobs are going to leave the country as a result. And you had that conversation where we're talking about a lot of call centers, and companies have a right to do business elsewhere when it makes more economic sense for them. And here he is setting the tone out of the gate, saying, look, if you want to do business in the U.S., if you want to have a good relationship with me, if you want to have a good relationship with the president going forward, you need to make this commitment to bring jobs back. And that's what this CEO is doing right out of the gate by saying they're going to bring Sprint jobs back. You're right. It would be easier to have a call center here because we've all experienced the frustration when you're talking to someone you know they're in another country. It can be English as a second language, and it can be difficult to communicate your needs to them, but it made sense for companies because the labor was so much cheaper. Donald Trump has to follow through and not just sort of coerce or persuade these CEOs to bring their jobs back, but he has to make it a better environment for them to keep those jobs here. That's the only way to sustain it long term. And he can do that with good tax policy, lower regulation, cheap energy, all kinds of things that make sense. They're taking the first step, but he has to make it work in the long run, and he knows that.
You talk to CEOs all the time,
Yes.
both After the Bell and then also on Background. How many of them are sort of licking their chops and going, okay, now we have a president who we know is willing to deal.
Yeah.
What can I get from the president in terms of tax cuts? How can I sort of leverage this? If I threaten to leave like a sports team does and demand tax credits, what can they get?
I think what they're saying to themselves, yes, it's part of that, is sort of how can I negotiate, but also here's someone who understands business, and here's someone who understands my costs and my challenges within my own company, because he's sat there and he's looked at his own balance sheet, he's looked at his own costs of labor, cost of production, cost of construction, and profit, and he understands the margin. In the past, the frustration has been politicians in Washington who simply don't understand business, who don't understand the pressures. I mean, it's about the bottom line. And so they're saying, look, you want me to bring jobs back? You've got to make that make economic sense. And he understands how to do that. So I don't know if it's a licking your chops as much as an, here's someone who gets
Here's
my
somebody
business.
we can make a deal
Who
with.
gets it, who gets what it means. And his priority is bringing jobs back. Fine. Here's what you can do to make that work for me.
And we'll see how many of these deals he can strike. Yeah. Last question before we let you go. 2 minutes, minute 40 seconds to the opening bell.
That's right.
We gonna see Dow 20,000 or profit taking for the rest of the year?
I don't know. You know, I mean, there's so much pressure to get there. Once we cross it, we'll probably see a little bit of a retreat. I don't know if it's going to happen before the end of the year. People are saying more and more no because we've been so resistant to it. It was only November 22nd when we crossed 19,000, so we've come a long way fast. At the end of the year, a lot of investors want to sell their dogs so they can lock in that loss for tax purposes. That's a bit of what we're seeing here. You got to watch. I mean, watch Fox Business at 4 p.m. I've got the close there. Liz Clayman right before me. If you want to know the answer, tune in.
All right. We'll watch right there.
There you go.
If you don't have Fox Business, demand it. Right? Heather?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, Russia announcing that President-elect Donald Trump is being invited to join in the Syria peace talks, something that the U.S. has been kept out of so far. This, plus more breaking news on a ceasefire just ahead, and more on the death of actress Debbie Reynolds just one day after the death of her daughter, Carrie Fisher. To a Fox News alert for you. This is coming out of Syria, where a nationwide ceasefire agreement has been reached. It is set to take effect at midnight local time tonight. Turkey and Russia brokering the deal with an estimated 60,000 rebel fighters. Now, ISIS and al-Qaeda are not part of the truce. Russia says the U.S. is welcome to join the peace talks once President-elect Trump takes office. Now, Turkey, the Syrian government, and Russia have been the main participants to this point, while the Obama administration has stayed out of direct talks.
Now that you have the proper setting, can you say it?
Remembering actress Debbie Reynolds passing away at the age of 84 just one day after her daughter Carrie Fisher died. She was Hollywood royalty in every way, singing and dancing into people's hearts at the early age of 19, the same age her daughter made her mark in Star Wars, helping us look back on Debbie Reynolds' incredible career. Fox News contributor, film critic Kevin McCarthy. Kevin, you know, there's the legacy on film that we see from Debbie Reynolds, and then there's also the legacy she left behind in a social sense. And so many people in the 60s, so many women in the 60s really looked at her as the first feminist to exist.
Yeah, she was an incredible person all around in regards to just in her personal life and also on screen as well. And that's the kind of the beauty of how Carrie Fisher was as well. And we all know her from the screen, but she was also very vocal about things and trying to bring light to certain issues and mental issues. But, you know, the clip we just showed just now of all those amazing scenes that she was involved in, that to me is the beauty of what being an artist allows. She will truly never die. She will truly never leave us because we can always go back and revisit her work. Same thing as Carrie Fisher. You can kind of go back and just revisit those amazing moments. And we see Singing in the Rain, which, by the way, she had no dancing experience whatsoever before she did that movie. And she had to get trained in the dancing, which is incredible. She did an interview with People in 2011 where she described that when she was doing those scenes in Good Morning, her feet were bleeding because she was doing so many different takes of it. And she's just an incredible talent. I mean, she's an amazing actress, amazing singer. The song Tammy was a massive hit in the 50s, great song as well. And I just feel like the relationship she had with her daughter was so special. And Carrie Fisher did an amazing honor to her in 2015 at the SAG Awards where they gave her a Lifetime Achievement Award. And just the idea of Carrie Fisher passing away on Tuesday and then the mother passing away on Wednesday is obviously a very incredibly hard thing to think about, considering the idea of dying possibly from a broken heart. And you think about these ideas of what this meant for her and how she was mourning her daughter for one day, and then she passes away. It's just an incredibly devastating thing. And I think watching the work, you mentioned 19 years old, both of these incredible women had their breakouts at 19. Carrie Fisher at 19 with Star Wars, and then Debbie Reynolds had a huge breakout with Singing in the Rain when she was 19 years old. But one of the beauties of both of these women is that they worked very, very, very hard into the older elements of their career. I mean, Debbie Reynolds was working up until 2015, at least on screen. She did Will and Grace until 2006. It really is incredible to think about that. She was Emmy nominated. She was Golden Globe nominated, Oscar nominated. She won an Emmy as well. And she just really transcended cinema and all of Hollywood. And you mentioned the personal life. That, to me, is the key to any celebrity. Anybody who reaches out into the world outside of the screen that they're on, to me, is an important person, and she really is a Hollywood icon that we're really going to miss.
Well, an icon in so many ways. And quickly, Kevin, as we think about this, though, she sort of spanned the time in Hollywood from where people's images were so tightly controlled by the publicists in Hollywood, and now through the age of TMZ and Twitter and everything else. How did she deal with those two different ways of her life being so public?
I mean, it really is interesting that you say that, because back in the day when she was acting, again, it was a completely different setting in regards to, like you mentioned, TMZ, and I think that Carrie Fisher embraced that aspect more. Debbie Reynolds was, again, more of a classic Hollywood type, and I don't think that. I think it's interesting to think about the different time periods that she was famous and all throughout the career, and she never let that bother her or get in her way.
Well, and also recovered so beautifully from the real personal crush of her husband leaving her for Liz Taylor as well. Kevin McCarthy, appreciate your time, sir, as we look back on Debbie Reynolds and, of course, her daughter as well. Heather?
Leland, thank you very much.
Prayers with her family and all her friends. Well, a new report on police fatalities revealing that the number of officers killed in the line of duty rose to 135 this year. That's the most since 2011. Well, Caroline Shively has more for us from Washington. Caroline, where are we seeing the biggest jump in fatalities?
Shootings, Heather, and specifically ambush-style attacks. 64 officers have been shot to death this year. That's a 56% jump over last year when 41 officers were fatally shot. That's according to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. 21 of those 64 shootings were ambushes, including 5 officers killed in Dallas in July, then 3 more in Baton Rouge just 10 days later. They are 2 of 8 multiple shooting death incidents that killed 20 officers this year. That's tied with 1971 for the highest year since 1932. The Dallas and Baton Rouge shootings helped push their states toward the top of the deadliest states for officers in 2016. 17 officers were killed in Texas, 10 in California, 9 in Louisiana, 8 in Georgia, and 6 in Michigan. The average age of these officers was 40, with 2 kids. Heather.
Well, we often think about big cities driving up these statistics, but many of these fatalities were in small towns, right?
Yeah, they were. In fact, earlier this month, over 6 days in small towns across Georgia, 6 officers were shot, 2 of them fatally. The 2 deaths were Public Safety Officer Jody Smith and Police Officer Nicholas Smar of the Americas Police Department. Both were shot during a domestic violence call. Even after being shot, Officer Smar performed CPR on Smith until he lost consciousness. When backup officers arrived, they found Smar slumped over Smith. He died that day, Smith the next. The men were lifelong friends. Smar was supposed to serve as Smith's best man in his wedding in May. Heather?
Yeah, I lived down the road from Americas for a period of time. Very small town. Caroline Shively, live for us. Thank you.
You bet.
Well, during the campaign, President-elect Trump vowed to take better care of our nation's veterans. So, how the incoming president could overhaul the VA, we'll talk about that. Plus, U.S. lawmakers and Israel's prime minister blasting Secretary of State John Kerry after he slammed Israel for continued settlement building in territory claimed by the Palestinians. Our next guest weighs in on the remarkable move by the outgoing administration.
2 things. One, we don't give a dime to the UN until they rescind that resolution. And then the other is to prevent even 1 dime, making it a crime to use any government money to recognize Palestine as an independent country or state.
President-elect Donald Trump now considering a major change to the Department of Veterans Affairs. A member of his transition team says that Mr. Trump could move toward privatizing the VA, and vets would then be able to bypass the agency and pick their own health care. But critics argue that the private health system is not equipped to help veterans with their unique needs, like PTSD and injuries sustained on the battlefield.
Israeli Prime Minister is firing back at the Obama administration, saying he can't wait till January 20th when Donald Trump is in the White House. Benjamin Netanyahu says the U.S. Secretary of State attacked the only democracy in the Middle East.
Secretary Kerry paid lip service to the unremitting campaign of terrorism that has been waged by the Palestinians against the Jewish state for nearly a century. What he did was to spend most of his speech blaming Israel for the lack of peace by passionately condemning a policy of enabling Jews to live in their historic homeland.
More on this, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters, Fox News strategic analyst. Good to see you, sir.
Hey, Leland, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. A few days away. New Year, almost unprecedented new kind of developments between Israel and the United States. We knew that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Obama administration didn't really like each other. We knew that President Obama and Mr. Netanyahu sort of had this personal animosity towards each other. But do you ever expect it to be laid out like this?
I didn't expect it, but I'm not that surprised by it. Because, Leland, and you have a lot of experience in the Middle East, you know, this goes beyond the personal animosity between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama. This Kerry's tirade was a logical culmination of Obama's Cairo speech, the infamous Cairo speech from early in his first administration. Obama's been very consistent on this. Now, he had to restrain his disdain for Israel because he had to win re-election and he had to get through the 2016 election, which didn't work out very well for the Democrats. But nonetheless, Obama consistently has, and I put it in just 6 words, his Middle East policy, 6 words: praise Muslims, ignore Christians, blame Jews. He comes from a background, literally from the cradle up, in which Israel is a villain. In the hard left, in which he spent most of his life, I mean, he's much more dogmatic than people realize. And the hard left insists that Israel is an oppressor and the Palestinians are noble freedom fighters. Then you have the side of Obama that comes from the Reverend Wright's Church, where anti-Semitism is a strong thread. So without overstating it, I think all this was predictable, and Obama has been unchallenged by the facts.
Colonel, I get the argument, but there's an argument that at least we need to talk about, which is the administration's argument, which says, look, this administration's given $38 billion to Israel, more than any other administration. That's a fact. And Secretary Kerry's argument went yesterday. He says, look, he said, essentially, Israel's settlement building harms American interest, and that's a debatable point. Therefore, as the Secretary of State, we have to protect American interests by calling out even a friend for doing something that harms us. Are Israeli settlements not in the interest of the United States? Is it as big of an issue as they'd like you to believe?
Well, it's an issue, and it's an important issue, but it's not as big as they're insisting. And the fact is this, that I don't approve of everything Israel does. I don't approve of everything the United States does. But we have to keep perspective. Israel is an island of civilization in a sea of barbarism. Israel is not only the only democracy, it's the only place in the Middle East where women have equal rights, where there's real education, where there's religious freedom, where there's hard-won prosperity. It's part of our civilization. And the Palestinians have had chance after chance from 1948 through 56, 67, 73, and again and again and again, it has been Palestinian intransigence that has prevented a two-state solution. And now, frankly, Leland, I don't think there's going to be a two-state solution or a three-state solution. I think because of the pandering to the terrorists, all you're going to see is a continued muddling through.
Well, we've often seen at the time that Israel makes those major concessions, whether it be with Egypt, whether it be with Jordan, and makes peace and sits down, whether it be with what they offered the Palestinians at the end of the Clinton administration. It was at the time when they felt like they had the most safety and security in a friend in the United States, not when you had somebody pushing back on them. Zoom out for me, though, here, and we've talked about this before, that we're sort of in uncharted territories. We have a Democratic administration abandoning Israel, our closest ally in the Middle East. We have a Republican administration that is incoming that's now cozying up, really, to Vladimir Putin and the Russians. President-elect Trump saying this about Russian hacking.
I think we ought to get on with our lives. I think that computers have complicated lives very greatly. The whole, age of computer has made it where nobody knows exactly what's going on.
Knowing you got to feel like you're in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I do, because we do know, without doubt, not only that the Russians did it, we know which Russians did it, which desks they were sitting at. And, President Trump, he's got a lot of good initiatives going. I'm rooting for him. He's our president. He's going to be our president. But he's got to decide whether he's going to defend America or defend Vladimir Putin. He can't go on cozying up to and making excuses for Vladimir Putin, who hates America viscerally and is our enemy, not because we choose Putin as an enemy.
Why do you think that? Do you think that President-elect Trump doesn't see that, doesn't care, thinks he can make a friend out of Vladimir Putin? Where is this disconnect between folks like you and the President-elect on Russia?
Well, I think the basic disconnect is that President Trump has not been interested in foreign policy, except when it has to do with business affairs. He doesn't have a background in it. And he doesn't understand the long history of Russia. He doesn't know Russians. And he certainly doesn't know Vladimir Putin. And Leland, my concern is simply this. Vladimir Putin has merely humiliated 2 U.S. presidents in a row. Now he has a third U.S. president who he believes he can manipulate. And if, you know, God knows, I want Trump to be a success. I want America to be a success. But Putin is our enemy.
As you point out, 2 U.S. presidents sort of felt the same way, that they could make nice and, as George W. Bush say, see into the soul of Vladimir Putin. That didn't work out so well for any of them, or Barack Obama's reset. Colonel Peters, appreciate your time, sir. Always a good chat.
Thank you, Leland.
Thanks. Heather?
Still to come, a relaxing trip to South Florida turning into a nightmare. We'll tell you what happened with these brave teenage boys coming up next.
Kids should buy a lottery ticket. 3 teenagers counting their lucky stars after their boat capsized off the Florida Keys. There they are. The boys were visiting from California when their rental boat started taking on water, then capsized. Get this, they were able to keep their cool, climb on top of the boat. Somehow they were able to protect their cell phone from the salt water and then used it to call 911. As you can see, rescuers showed up, reaching them safely, bringing them back to shore. No kidding, they're smiling.
Would you be that calm?
Yeah, and what a story to tell their friends. Yeah. What'd you do for Christmas break?
Exactly. Well, people in New England, meantime, speaking of Christmas break, they're bracing for a major snowstorm that is heading their way. It is expected to dump more than a foot of snow on some areas. It's true. Senior meteorologist Janice Dean is in the Fox Weather Center with the latest forecast. Janice?
Hi, Heather. Yeah, up to 2 feet maybe for the mountains of New England. Let's take a look at it. We've got our storm system that's moving across the coast, and we're expecting it to strengthen over the next 12 to 24 hours. The front associated with it that could actually bring some isolated severe storms as well. I've seen severe thunderstorm warnings in Georgia this morning, but there's the storm system that is bringing, you know, rain, a mix of rain and snow and snow. So Philadelphia, you're a light rain here, light rain for New York City, cloudy in Providence, but it's on its way. Let's take a look at the winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings in effect from the Appalachians all the way to Maine. And in the pink, that's where we have our winter storm warnings, where we think we could get upwards of maybe 2 feet of snow as this storm really winds up overnight tonight. We call it bombogenesis, a weather bomb. That's what's happening as it moves off the coast and interacts with the relatively warm waters of the Atlantic. It strengthens exponentially. So there's your forecast precipitation. Yeah, we're going to get quite a bit of snow, especially across the Great Lakes, interior Northeast, upstate New York, in towards New England, where they could easily get 2 feet of snow. For Times Square, this thing will be out of here by Friday, which is great news because we've got a big telecast with Eric Bowling and Kimberly Guilfoyle, and their hairdos will be just fine. 38 degrees with cloudy skies as we do the ball drop in Times Square, which is great news. And Heather, we're talking about statistics. The warmest New Year's on record, 58 degrees. That was in 1965 and 1972. The coldest back in 1917 was one with the coldest wind chill of -21. So we'll take it. We will take 38 degrees and cloudy skies.
You know, I think I would enjoy -21.
You would?
No, I'm kidding.
Okay. I'll be enjoying beverages at home.
All right. Thank you, Janice.
Okay, you got it.
News you can use about those hairdos. A bitter back and forth between the United States and Israel continues, roiling the final weeks of the Obama administration. President-elect Donald Trump promising a whole new relationship with Israel, something, as we've heard, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he welcomes.
Israel looks forward to working with President-elect Trump and with the American Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, to mitigate the damage that this resolution has done